Billionaire CEO humiliated the black waitress in front of 200 guests. Then his biggest investor stood up. What could make a billionaire CEO humiliate a black waitress in front of 200 guests? And why would his biggest investor suddenly stand up? Welcome, everyone, to another powerful story where one unforgettable moment can change everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next emotional and inspiring story. Thank you so much for being here, watching, and supporting the channel. Your support means more than you know. Now, we want to hear from you. What would you do if you witnessed a waitress being humiliated in front of a room full of guests? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And now, let's step into the story and discover how this extraordinary moment began. The champagne glass tilted over the white carpet, and Nia caught it before $50 million watched it fall. Crystal chimed against her silver tray. A bead of champagne slid over her gloved thumb while the string quartet played beneath chandeliers, throwing warm gold across the Grand Meridian Ballroom. 200 guests moved through the room in tailored tuxedos and silk gowns, carrying the scents of cedar cologne, white roses, and truffle butter. Nia Brooks steadied the glass, reset it beside 11 identical flutes, and continued toward the service entrance without breaking stride. Brooks, her banquet manager, intercepted her beside the kitchen doors, where oven heat pressed through the polished brass frame. He held out a black apron and a revised floor card. Table 1. VIP service. Nia glanced at the embossed seating chart. Margaret Whitmore occupied the center seat. Ethan Cole sat beside her. That wasn't my section. It is now? Simmons called out. He lowered his voice as silverware clattered behind them. This gala raised $50 million. One stained cuff can cost us the account. No improvising. No conversation. Nia tied the apron around her waist. She had accepted the shift because the agency offered double pay plus gratuity, a rare night when 12 hours on her feet could cover more than groceries and bus fare. Refusing the reassignment would mean losing that chance before the first course. Understood, she said, taking the VIP card. Across the ballroom, Ethan Cole adjusted his cuff links for the third time. Cameras loved the clean line of his midnight blue tuxedo and the confidence printed beside his name in business magazines. Up close, the polish had cracks. His water remained untouched. His phone vibrated against the linen, stopped, then vibrated again. On its screen, a message from the board chairman waited beneath one from the project lender. N.O. Whitmore's signature tonight. N.O. Bridge, financing Monday. East Harbor was presented on stage as a gleaming urban rebirth. New apartments, retail blocks, and thousands of promised jobs rising from abandoned waterfront lots. But the project had burned through delays and lender patience. Margaret Whitmore's approval would release $1.2 billion and keep Ethan's company from losing control of the development. Without it, years of speeches, architectural renderings, and political promises could collapse before the markets opened. Ethan looked toward Margaret at table 1. The 70-year-old investor wore a plain charcoal suit amid the sequins and diamonds. Her silver hair swept neatly behind one ear. She had not touched the ceremonial agreement beside her plate. She was reading the East Harbor presentation packet instead, one page at a time. Ethan crossed to his chief financial officer near the stage. Why hasn't she signed? He asked, smiling for a passing photographer without moving his lips. She wants to hear the employment projections in the final presentation. She already received them. She wants to hear you defend them. The quartet ended. Applause rolled beneath the chandeliers, soft but expectant. Ethan's jaw tightened once. Then make certain every number on that screen is clean. Nia approached table 1 with 12 fresh glasses balanced above her shoulder. Cold condensation soaked through the tray cloth. Margaret raised her eyes as Nia placed a glass precisely above the investor's knife. Ethan returned to his seat, carrying the scent of expensive leather and a silence sharp enough to clear space around him. On stage, the East Harbor logo illuminated a screen 40 feet wide. The first projection appeared in white letters. 18,000 new jobs. Nia reached for the next glass. Then her hand stopped. Not long enough for anyone to complain, but long enough for her to look at the smaller figure printed beneath it. The two numbers did not belong together. A low electronic hum rolled through the ballroom as the projection changed. Beneath the towering promise of 18,000 new jobs, a smaller line appeared. 6,400 permanent positions. Nia resumed pouring sparkling water, but her eyes tracked the figures reflected in the polished silver tray. The glass felt cold between her fingers. Around table 1, silk sleeves brushed linen. Ice clicked softly, and the air carried white roses, truffle butter, and money. East Harbor will restore dignity through employment, the presenter announced. Applause rose beneath the chandeliers. Ethan did not join it. He watched Margaret Whitmore, whose hands remained folded beside an untouched glass. Nia moved clockwise around the table. On screen, a bar chart split the promised jobs into construction, logistics, retail, and technology. 18,000 sounded impressive. The categories did, too. But construction contracts expired. Seasonal retail jobs vanished after 12 months. 2 logistics facilities appeared in both the direct employment column and the contractor estimate. The same workers had been counted twice. Her thumb pressed against the tray's damp cloth. She had seen this method before in case studies. Inflate the headline, bury the definitions, let the room applaud before anyone reached the footnotes. A server beside her reached for the projector packet, resting near Ethan's place setting. Leave that, Nia whispered. Why? Page 14. Without disrupting service, she angled the packet beneath the amber table lamp. The projected total promised 18,000 new jobs. The internal estimate listed 10,750 job years, a measurement of labor over time, not actual permanent employees. Another note excluded automation losses at existing warehouses. Nia's jaw tightened. That number isn't what they're calling it. The server glanced toward the service doors. Not our table. Not our business. That was how rooms like this protected themselves. Not with locked doors. With people trained to look away. Nia could have done the same. Her mother's prescriptions were due Friday. One complaint from a billionaire's table could erase 3 weeks of wages and every future shift at the hotel. She straightened the packet, returned it exactly where it had been, and carried the empty glasses toward the service corridor. Bright music softened behind the closing door. Stainless steel counters threw back hard fluorescent light. The kitchen smelled of citrus peel, hot butter, and coffee scorched on a warming plate. Mr. Bell, the banquet manager, stood beside racks of plated desserts, checking his watch. Nia approached without raising her voice. I need you to flag something in the East Harbor presentation. His pen stopped. Flag what? The employment total. They're presenting job years as permanent jobs, and at least 2 contractor groups are counted twice. A dishwasher hissed open behind them, releasing a cloud of heat. Mr. Bell looked past her toward the ballroom, then lowered his clipboard. You were listening to the presentation? I was serving table 1. The figures were on the screen and in the packet beside the glasses. Nia, those guests paid more for one seat than this staff makes tonight. That doesn't make the arithmetic different. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but calculation. Hotel reputation. Client satisfaction. A black waitress challenging a billionaire's numbers minutes before a $1.2 billion signature. Every risk had entered the corridor at once. Nia placed a folded service note beneath his clipboard. 3 figures. 3-page references. No accusation. No spectacle. Please give it to whoever verifies the presentation, she said. Quietly. Mr. Bell studied the note. Then he slipped it into his jacket. Returned to the floor. Say nothing else. Nia pushed through the service door, surrendering her warning to a system built to protect the powerful. Across the ballroom, Ethan's chief of staff opened the note beside him. Ethan read the first line. Then his gaze lifted from the paper and found Nia carrying a tray beneath 200 lights. He leaned toward Mr. Bell and spoke 5 words. "Bring that waitress to me. Bring that waitress to me." The words crossed the ballroom more cleanly than the violin music. Crystal chandeliers burned above 200 guests, while chilled air carried the scent of white roses, champagne, and seared filet across the linen-covered tables. Mr. Bell stepped into Nia's path and touched the edge of her silver tray. "Set it down." Nia placed the tray on a service stand. Porcelain whispered against polished metal. Across the room, Ethan waited beside the stage, the folded warning trapped between 2 fingers. His chief of staff stood close enough to intervene, but Ethan moved first. He took the microphone. The final notes of the quartet thinned into silence. "Before we continue," Ethan said, "we need to address an unfortunate disruption." Faces turned. Forks stopped above plates. Margaret Whitmore remained seated at table 1, her hands folded beside an untouched champagne flute. Ethan motioned Nia forward. She crossed the white carpet alone, hearing the measured click of her shoes and the faint hum of the projector behind him. When she stopped several feet from the stage, he raised her note. "Did you write this?" "Yes. While serving my guests." While listening to figures presented to the room. A few people shifted in their chairs. Ethan's jaw tightened for half a second. The East Harbor Agreement rested on the table behind him, waiting for Margaret's signature, and Nia's page references had placed a shadow over every polished promise. He could have requested verification. Instead, he chose spectacle. "So you admit you were eavesdropping on a private business presentation?" Nia looked past the microphone toward the projection screen. It was presented to everyone here. The answer drew a soft ripple through the ballroom. Ethan stepped down from the stage, closing the distance until the smell of his cedarwood cologne cut through the roses. "You were hired to carry glasses, not audit development models." His voice stayed smooth, designed for cameras and boardrooms. "And moments ago, I was informed that you spilled wine near the VIP tables." Nia glanced at Mr. Bell. His clipboard pressed against his chest, but he did not confirm the claim. There had been no spill. Ethan knew it. Nia knew it. Now the silence knew it too. "No wine was spilled," she said. Ethan gave a thin smile. "Then perhaps you were too distracted listening to conversations beyond your qualifications to notice." Heat climbed beneath the collar of Nia's uniform, but her hands remained open at her sides. No clenched fists. No lowered eyes. The page numbers are either correct or they aren't. A camera phone rose near table 12. Then another. Ethan saw them and turned cruelty into theater before doubt could become momentum. A banquet waitress with unfinished credentials believes she understands a multi-billion-dollar redevelopment better than the executives, economists, and attorneys who built it. Several guests looked down at their plates. Others watched Nia as though dignity under pressure were its own kind of evidence. "This room is not your classroom," Ethan continued. "And confidence is not competence." Nia said nothing. The projector fan whirred behind them. Somewhere near the kitchen doors, ice cracked inside a silver bucket. Ethan handed the microphone to his chief of staff, then faced Mr. Bell. "Remove her from the floor." Effective immediately. Mr. Bell's throat moved before he answered. "Yes, sir." He approached Nia with the careful posture of a man carrying out an order he did not want attached to his name. Ethan returned to the stage, expecting applause to restore the balance. None came. At table 1, Margaret Whitmore had not moved. Her gaze rested first on Ethan, then on Nia, then on the folded warning still visible in his hand. Mr. Bell opened the service door. Warm kitchen air rushed into the chilled ballroom, smelling of butter, coffee, and scorched sugar. "Come with me," he said quietly. Nia stepped through. Behind her, Ethan tapped the microphone and tried to resume a presentation that no longer sounded unquestioned. In the service corridor, Mr. Bell placed a termination form on his clipboard and held out a pen. "Sign that the accusation was accurate," he murmured, "and we can end this cleanly." Nia looked at the empty signature line. Then she looked through the narrow window in the door, where 200 guests waited beneath the chandeliers. Cleanly for whom? She asked. The pen rolled across the clipboard and stopped against Mr. Bell's thumb. Beyond the service door, Ethan's amplified voice seeped through the narrow window, flattened by thick oak and the low hum of kitchen vents. The corridor was too warm. Steam carried the smell of coffee and scorched sugar, while fluorescent light gleamed against stainless steel carts. Nia read the termination form from top to bottom. Her alleged misconduct had already been reduced to 3 neat lines. Eavesdropping on confidential discussions, spilling wine near the presentation stage, and disrupting a private corporate event. Beneath them waited a sentence authorizing the hotel to share the report with future employers. If I sign this, I'm not just losing tonight's shift, Nia said. Mr. Bell lowered his eyes. His fingers tightened around the clipboard's metal edge. Corporate wants the incident closed. Ethan wants it closed. The microphone crackled in the ballroom. Ethan was speaking about community trust now, each polished phrase followed by a silence where applause should have been. Mr. Bell pushed the pen closer. Refusing won't change the termination. Nia removed her name badge. The pin caught briefly in the black fabric of her uniform, making a dry tearing sound before it came free. She placed it beside the unsigned form. Then terminate me for refusing to lie. Mr. Bell stared at the badge. For 3 years, that small brass rectangle had opened employee doors, clocked her into double shifts, and paid for groceries between her mother's prescription refills. Now it lay beneath the buzzing light, like something already belonging to the past. Effective immediately, he said, his voice nearly lost beneath the kitchen fans. You're no longer employed by the hotel. Nia nodded once. No pleading. No bargain. She slid the clipboard back without touching the pen. Mr. Bell stamped the form refused TO sign, and the hard mechanical snap traveled down the corridor. A banquet server arrived pushing an empty cart. Its wheels rattled over the grout, and a cream-colored folder shifted beneath a folded linen napkin on the lower shelf. Nia recognized it at once. The folder had been placed on her tray before Ethan's presentation, mistaken for the guest packets delivered to the VIP tables. She had returned the original to the staging station, but banquet procedure required servers to keep duplicate routing sheets until the event closed. Her carbon copy remained tucked inside the service pocket of her apron. Nia reached beneath the fabric and drew out the thin pages. East Harbor Redevelopment, Employment Impact Summary. The paper felt damp from the heat of the corridor. Across the top sat the same projection Ethan had defended beneath the chandeliers. Beneath it were the smaller figures no one had read aloud. Mr. Bell looked from the pages to the closed ballroom door. That belongs to the event. This copy was placed on my tray, Nia said. And it documents what I reported before I was accused of anything. Nia, leave it. You already took my job. She folded the copy once, carefully, without hiding it. You don't get to take the record too. Through the window, Ethan lifted one hand toward the glowing East Harbor map, trying to guide the room back toward the signature waiting at table 1. Nia buttoned the pages inside her apron, picked up her coat, and moved toward the ballroom door instead of the employee exit. Mr. Bell stepped into her path. Cold air slipped through the frame and brushed her face. You've been ordered off the property, he warned. Nia rested her hand on the brass handle. Then he can explain why the woman he fired is carrying the numbers he refused to verify. The brass handle turned with a soft metallic click, and warm ballroom air spilled into the corridor, carrying trumpet notes, roasted garlic, and expensive perfume. Mr. Bell caught the door before it opened fully. Nia kept walking. His polished shoes slid across the threshold, but he could not block her without making the struggle visible through the glass. The jazz quartet faltered first. Then silverware stopped moving. Ethan was still beneath the East Harbor map, one hand extended toward a skyline rendered in gold, when Nia crossed onto the white carpet wearing her coat over her uniform. You were ordered to leave, he said. His microphone carried the words to every table. I was also ordered to sign a lie. Nia removed the folded summary from her apron. The paper made a dry, crisp sound as she opened it beneath the chandelier. Ethan's chief of staff reached for the microphone, but Ethan held it tighter. Security. 3 numbers, Nia said. No shout. No plea. Just 2 words sharp enough to hold the room. She stepped toward the projection screen and raised the first page. Your presentation promises 18,000 new jobs. The supporting table measures job years. 1 person employed for 3 years is counted as 3. Those are not 18,000 people. A murmur moved beneath the chandeliers. Nia turned the page. Second, the same contractor positions appear in both the construction estimate and the supplier impact estimate. They were counted twice. Ethan's jaw shifted. On the giant screen behind him, the gold figure, 18,000, looked less like a promise now and more like an accusation. Third, only 2,900 positions are classified as permanent. That distinction disappears from the investor summary. Nia placed the pages on the nearest empty table, flattening the crease with her palm. The linen felt cool beneath her fingertips. Page 12. Page 19. Appendix C. Anyone in this room can check. And what qualifies you to interpret a development model? Ethan asked. The question came smoothly, but his cuff brushed the microphone stand with a faint clink. Nia looked directly at him. I studied financial analysis. A few guests shifted. Margaret Whitmore's scholarship fund covered my first 3 years. I left before graduation when my mother became ill and needed full-time care. She did not look toward the cameras. She did not soften her voice. That is why I carry trays. It is not why these numbers are wrong. The room went still enough for the ventilation system to be heard breathing through the ceiling. I'm not asking for my job back, Nia continued. I'm not asking anyone here to feel sorry for me. I'm asking for the figures to be verified before someone signs away $1.2 billion. At table 1, Margaret Whitmore's pen remained beside the unsigned agreement. Ethan glanced toward his chief of staff. This time, the aide did not wait for permission. He took the microphone Ethan had loosened and asked, Do we have the underlying employment model? A folder opened near the stage. Pages turned too quickly. Ethan stared at the 3 citations while the glowing harbor behind him washed his face in cold blue light. Nia had entered the ballroom as a dismissed employee carrying a disputed copy. Now 200 guests were waiting for the billionaire at center stage to answer the woman he had tried to silence. Verify all 3, Ethan said at last. His chief of staff did not move. Before Mrs. Whitmore signs? Ethan's eyes traveled to table 1, where the most important pen in the room had not touched the paper. Now, he said. A laptop fan whined beneath the dying jazz, and the ballroom's cold blue light flickered across a spreadsheet no one wanted to read aloud. Silverware lay untouched on white linen. The air smelled of truffle butter, spilled Cabernet, and the hot plastic of stage equipment. Ethan's chief of staff enlarged the underlying employment model on the presentation screen. Cells replaced the polished harbor rendering. 18,000 jobs collapsed into columns, contract periods, and footnotes. The page references match, the aide said. His voice carried through the speakers with nowhere to hide. Job years were reported as individual positions. 2 contractor groups appear twice. A pause. Keys clicked. Permanent employment is projected at 2,900. A murmur rolled across the 200 guests. Ethan looked toward his chief financial officer near the stage. The man's hand tightened around his phone. You approved the headline figure, Ethan said. The CFO adjusted his cuff. The methodology was summarized for presentation purposes. Did you disclose the 2,900? The complete assumptions were available to senior leadership. That answer landed harder than a denial. Ethan had wanted proof that Nia was wrong. Instead, he had received confirmation that his own executive had buried the truth, and an unmistakable reminder that the final presentation bore Ethan's approval. Nia stood beside the stage with her carbon copy held flat against her apron. She did not celebrate. She simply watched Ethan decide what mattered more, the facts now glowing above him or the agreement waiting at table 1. Suspend the presentation, one board member said from the front row. Another closed his East Harbor binder. We need counsel before proceeding. Ethan's chief of staff lowered the microphone and stepped away from him. It was a small movement, less than 3 feet, but every director saw it. Control was slipping from Ethan in visible inches. Margaret Whitmore remained seated, her gold pin untouched beside the $1.2 billion agreement. Ethan turned toward Nia. You've made your point. The numbers made it, she replied. Mr. Bell appeared at the ballroom doors with 2 security officers. Their polished shoes crossed the marble in measured beats. Nia glanced at them, then back at Ethan. You ordered verification, she said. You have it. For one clean second, Ethan could have stopped. He could have suspended the CFO, protected the records, and admitted that the waitress he had dismissed had shown more discipline than the executives around him. Instead, his eyes moved to the unsigned agreement. Remove her, he said. No one mistook the order. One security officer hesitated. Sir, escort her out. Now, we will address internal reporting through proper channels. Nia placed the carbon copy on the edge of the stage before either officer reached her. Then the proper channel has 200 witnesses. Phones rose again. Red recording lights dotted the darkened tables. The CFO stared at the carpet. Ethan's chief of staff set the microphone on the lectern rather than returning it to his hand. Around the board's table, binders closed one after another. Soft, final thuds against linen. Nia did not force the officers to touch her. She turned and walked between them, her shoes quiet against the white carpet Ethan had tried to keep spotless. Behind her, a director removed his East Harbor voting card from the table. Another followed. Ethan had chosen the chair he wanted to save, and in doing so, he had made the room question whether he still deserved to occupy it. Then Wood scraped sharply across marble from table 1. Margaret Whitmore was rising. The scrape of Margaret Whitmore's chair cut through the ballroom like a blade across glass. Crystal chandeliers burned gold above 200 motionless guests, while the abandoned jazz microphone released a thin electric hum. At the doors, the security officers stopped beside Nia. Margaret rose from table 1 without applauding. The unsigned $1.2 billion agreement lay beneath her hand, its silver pin still aligned with the empty signature line. No one removes her, she said. Her voice was quiet, but Mr. Bell lowered his raised hand. Ethan turned toward the woman whose capital had brought every director into that room. Margaret, the figures are being reviewed. They have been reviewed. She lifted the employment impact summary from her table. Your chief of staff verified all 3 discrepancies. Job years were represented as individual jobs. Contractor positions were counted twice. And the permanent employment figure is 2,900, not 18,000. The air conditioning whispered through the ceiling vents. No one reached for a wine glass. Ethan's CFO shifted beneath the white stage lights. The methodology was summarized, he said. The assumptions were available to senior leadership. A few board members looked at Ethan. Margaret did not. Her attention crossed the room to Nia, waiting between the officers with her banquet badge no longer pinned to her uniform. Nia, Margaret said, come back. Nia turned. The carpet compressed beneath each measured step as she returned, not to Ethan's lectern, but to the open floor where he had tried to reduce her to a uniform. Margaret moved away from table 1 and met her there. Nia was one of the strongest students funded by the Whitmore Foundation, she told the room. Her work in financial analysis was precise, disciplined, and unusually resistant to convenient assumptions. Camera phones tilted toward Nia. She kept her hands at her sides. I left the program, Nia said. You left school to care for your mother, Margaret replied. That changed your enrollment. It did not erase your ability. The words settled over the ballroom with more weight than the chandeliers, the donor names, or the billion-dollar documents. Margaret retrieved the carbon copy from the stage and held it beside the verified model on the chief of staff's tablet. The headline figures matched. So did the smaller numbers Nia had identified. Her analysis is correct, Margaret said. Completely correct. Ethan reached toward the microphone. His chief of staff picked it up first and stepped away from him. The internal model confirms Ms. Nia's statements, the aide announced. Then the microphone remained in the aide's hand. Margaret returned to table 1. The agreement's pages made a dry, expensive rustle as she closed the folder. She removed the silver pen, placed it inside her handbag, and fastened the clasp. Effective immediately, Whitmore Capital is freezing the entire $1.2 billion East Harbor investment, pending an independent investigation. Ethan's jaw tightened. You'll destroy the financing timetable. No, Margaret said. Misleading the people whose neighborhood you intend to rebuild did that. She looked toward Nia, then toward the directors who had withdrawn their voting cards. The review will have full access to the employment model, approval records, and executive communications. No internal substitutions. No private summary. No signature until the facts are certified. The largest investor had not merely refused to sign. She had removed Ethan's control over whether the truth would be examined. Around him, chairs turned away from the stage and toward the board's table. Nia stood beneath the same white light that had exposed her minutes earlier, while Ethan faced the closed agreement and the executive aide holding the microphone beyond his reach. Margaret rested one hand on the folder. There is one decision left tonight, Ethan. Will you open those records yourself, or will the board open them after removing you? The microphone gave a low electric hum in the silence. Cold air spilled from the ceiling vents, stirring the linen beside Margaret's closed agreement, while the scent of spilled Bordeaux lingered over the white carpet. For 3 measured seconds, Ethan looked at the board table, at his chief of staff holding the microphone, and finally at Nia beneath the hard stage lights. Then he stepped away from the podium. Open the records, he said. No one moved. The words were too quiet for a room that had just watched him fight so hard to avoid them. Ethan held out his hand, but not toward his chief of staff. He pointed to the sealed presentation files beside the CFO. Every version, every email, every approval note. Send them to independent auditors tonight. The CFO pushed back from the table, his cuff striking a water glass. Ethan, the methodology was summarized. The assumptions were available to senior leadership. A murmur passed through the guests. It was not an excuse. It was an admission that the distortion had traveled upward, and that Ethan's signature sat above it. Including me, Ethan said. His voice carried without the microphone. I approved the presentation. I accepted the headline because it served the deal, and when Nia challenged it, I attacked her instead of checking the facts. The chief of staff lowered the microphone slightly, though she did not return it. Ethan turned toward the CFO. You are suspended effective immediately. Your access to company systems and East Harbor records ends now. Security will escort you only to collect personal belongings, with counsel present. The CFO's face tightened under the chandelier's gold light. He reached for the binder, but a director placed one palm over its leather cover. This time, the room did not obey the executive nearest the money. It obeyed the evidence. Ethan removed his chairman's pin from his lapel. The tiny piece of silver clicked against the podium, sharper than applause. I am stepping aside as chairman for the duration of the investigation. The board may appoint independent interim leadership before midnight. I will surrender my devices, correspondence, calendars, and authorization records without limitation. Margaret watched him over folded hands. Voluntarily, and in writing. Only then did Ethan face Nia. The warmth of the stage lamps had gathered along his collar, but his hands remained open at his sides. No security stood between them now. No manager reached for her arm. Mr. Bell had stopped near the ballroom doors, his dismissal form hanging uselessly from one hand. Nia, Ethan said, I accused you of dishonesty to protect my authority. I used your uniform, your position, and this room against you. You were accurate. I was not. I apologize, without asking you to forgive me. Return to work, or make this easier for me." Nia studied him across the strip of stained white carpet. "Then make sure the apology survives after these guests go home." Ethan nodded once. He signed the temporary resignation resolution where Margaret's $1.2 billion agreement had been waiting. His chief of staff countersigned it, retained the microphone, and handed the sealed executive record authorization to Margaret. Across the ballroom, phones rose again, not to record Nia being removed, but to capture a billionaire surrendering the power he had abused. Yet Nia did not smile. She looked at the directors closing ranks around the auditor's instructions, then at the 200 guests who had remained silent when silence was convenient. Ethan had opened his records. He had surrendered his chair. But one debt still stood in the center of the room, unpaid. What would everyone who witnessed the humiliation do now that power could no longer excuse them? Crystal glasses began touching the linen one by one, soft clicks spreading through the ballroom like rain against a window. Beneath the chandeliers, the air smelled of spilled Cabernet, warm wax, and dinners no one had finished. Nia remained beside the stained white carpet, her empty serving tray cold against her palm. Ethan stood several feet away without his chairman's pin, while the signed resignation resolution lay under his chief of staff's hand. Then Margaret Whitmore turned, not toward Ethan, but toward the 200 guests. "Mr. Bell," she said, "please open the doors." The banquet manager obeyed. Cool night air slipped into the overheated ballroom, stirring the unused dismissal form still clenched in his fingers. Nia looked toward the exit. No guard blocked it now. No job waited behind it. She could leave with her dignity intact and allow the powerful to repair their own damage. Instead, she placed the tray on a linen-covered table. The silver rim struck the wood with a clean, final note. "Before anyone walks out," she said, "I want the record to show who was willing to watch." Chairs creaked. Eyes dropped. The shame no longer belonged to one billionaire alone. A board director rose first and admitted that he had seen security move toward Nia, but had protected the deal instead of the truth. Another stood. Then Ethan's chief of staff. She set the microphone down, signed a written statement acknowledging that executive pressure had delayed verification, and committed the staff's cooperation to the auditors. Around the room, voting cards were placed beside untouched plates. Names followed. Witnesses became participants. Mr. Bell crossed the carpet slowly, the dismissal form trembling against his cuff. He tore it once, then again, but Nia stopped him before the pieces reached the floor. "Keep it," she said. "Give it to the auditors. Accountability doesn't begin by destroying evidence." He flattened the torn halves on the table and signed beneath his own instruction to remove her. Margaret watched without applause. Then she slid the sealed authorization toward Nia. "What remedy do you require?" Nia did not ask for her job back. She did not ask for a check, a title, or a photograph beside the woman who had once funded her education. She required corrected East Harbor figures to be published before any agreement returned for approval. She required affected residents and workers to receive seats in every redevelopment hearing. And she required an independent reporting channel so no employee would again have to gamble rent money against executive pride. Margaret accepted each condition. The board recorded them in the resolution. Only then did Nia face Ethan. The chandeliers caught the pale mark where his pin had been. "You asked me to accept an apology," she said. "I asked whether it would survive this room. Now make it survive your return to power, if that day comes." Ethan picked up the torn dismissal form and placed it beside his signed resignation. "It will remain in the record," he answered. "So will what I did." No excuse followed. No request for absolution softened the words. Nia lifted her coat from the back of a service chair. As she crossed the ballroom, Margaret stood first. Ethan stood next, not as chairman, not as host, but as the man who had finally learned that respect could not be commanded. Then Mr. Bell rose. The directors followed, one table after another, until all 200 guests were on their feet. Nia paused beneath the open doors as cold air moved across her face. She had entered carrying their glasses. She left carrying the standard by which every person in that room would now be judged. Ethan had once owned the room, but Nia taught it how to stand.